All right. Hello, everyone. We are waiting. I see some people are filing in. So I'm just going to give a moment. And while I want to do that, I want to say hello. My name is Katie Starantino. I am the Director of Wellness Initiatives here at Friends Life Care. We have a great presentation we're really excited about today, and it will be recorded. So for those that are going to watch it later, feel free to send me any questions I can pass along. But without further ado, I'm going to step back and hand the presentation over to Adam Brunner, who will then pass it along to Dr. Pomerantz.
Great. Thank you, Katie. Welcome, everybody. We're really excited that you're here to join us today. I want to, for our agenda today will be basically that Dr. Pomerantz will conduct a presentation on the aging brain that'll last about 45 minutes. We'll have time afterwards for about 15 minutes for questions and answers. And then after that, I will give a brief presentation about the OLLI program, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, which is a program that Jay teaches for. And we'll be able to answer any questions at the end about the OLLI program, and if you're interested in learning more. So without further ado, I want to start by introducing Jay. Dr. J. M. Pomerantz. He will discuss some detail about how the brain ages, both normally and under the influence of dementing illnesses such as Alzheimer's. Brain deterioration is not inevitable. There is plasticity and growth of neurons at any age. Most importantly, there is a new scientific evidence that brain function can be enhanced or enfeebled by things under our control, even as we move through the 70s and 80s and beyond. Both the evidence and the conclusions are the subject of Jay's talk today. Dr. Pomerantz received his AB from Hamilton College and an MD from Yale University School of Medicine. Following a rotating internship at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania here in Philly, he served in the U.S. Peace Corps, first as a staff physician in Panama, and then as medical director for Latin America. He then completed a residency in psychiatry at Massachusetts Mental Health Center and a fellowship in community mental health at Harvard Medical School. Afterwards, he moved to Western Massachusetts as the regional administrator for the Massachusetts Department of Mental Health. After 7 years in that position, Dr. Pomerantz spent the next 40 years in private practice with part of every week devoted to teaching medical students and psychiatric residents. He has co-authored 2 books and authored more than 120 articles, 5 book chapters, and numerous book reviews. His awards include being a Distinguished Life Fellow of the American Psychiatric Association and winner of the Outstanding Psychiatrist Award of the Massachusetts Psychiatric Association in 2000 for the advancement of the profession. Since retiring from psychiatric practice in 2015 and returning to Philadelphia with his wife, Farida, Dr. Pomerantz has been teaching at OLLI, Temple University. Over these years, he has taught subjects such as neuroscience of memory, genes and stem cells, the immunological approach to cancer treatment, and aging as a treatable disease. He's currently working on a new course for OLLI entitled When Prozac and Psychotherapy Haven't Worked, New Thinking and Treatments. Thank you for allowing me that introduction, and I'd now like to turn it over to Jay.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Katie. There'll be plenty of time for questions after the presentation, which will run about 45 minutes. So we're going to follow. If you look on the screen, you see.
Jay, we can't yet see the PowerPoint.
Oh, well, that's not very good. Let me try.
I would maybe, there it is. Perfect.
Okay, good. All right, that's much better. Let's do from the beginning.
It's a little slow.
Yeah.
I wouldn't worry about it, Jay.
There it is.
There we go. There we go. Great.
Okay, good. So if you can see on the screen is a cut about right through the middle of the brain. Sort of, if you're facing forward, it's a slice from the middle of the skull, but it's only showing the brain. And on the left, you see a much nicer picture. That's a healthy brain. On the right is an advanced Alzheimer brain. And you see there are holes in it, and it's shrunken, and it's creased, and it functions about as well as it looks, not very well. The healthy brain, this could be a brain from any age. The healthy brain of an older person looks a little bit off from what you're seeing here, which is probably a person in their 20s or 30s. But somebody in their 70s or 80s would look an awful lot more like the healthy brain, if they were healthy, than the Alzheimer brain. And we're going to follow both tracks, because aging follows a totally different corridor depending upon health. And we're going to be talking about how to manifest and maximize health. So the first thing to do is we're seeing the dementia prevalence by age groups. And as you can see, as you can see, actually this is 90 to 94 is yellow, and white is even older. So every age group goes up. The 60s are down here, and you see dementia is really 2%. But by the time you get to be in the higher age groups, it goes up to 30% in men and almost 50%, 45% in women. This is one of the few slides that you're ever going to see about any comparison between males and females in which it's advantageous to be a male. So dementia is slightly less common in men, and that takes into account the fact that women on average live longer anyhow. So overall, there's somewhat more dementia in females. Now, there's all different kinds of dementias. We've been talking mostly about Alzheimer's disease, which is 54% of it. Vascular disease is 16%. Then there's a whole bunch of other things. There's a dementia that's associated with Parkinson's disease. There's frontotemporal dementia. There's something called Pick's disease. There's lots of different kinds of diseases. Also, people can have more than one kind of dementia. And of course, their function is much worse when that happens. So, and we're going to try to do two things. And incidentally, as we get older, it's harder to do two things at once. We're really not processing at the same time, but we're, so I find even when I'm driving my car now, I tend not to listen to the radio. In the past, it was easy for me to listen to the radio, or especially a book on tape or something, and then drive. But now I find I need to, and I'm already in my, I'm already 83. So I'm well up there, probably older than many of you. So in any event, we're going to try to follow normal aging and then the aging of Alzheimer's disease. And it's important to tease them out, because we're all worried that we're going to have Alzheimer's disease, a little less worried about normal aging. We're all forgetful. I find it hard to find a word or a name, but there's a big difference. In normal aging, we make a bad decision once in a while. In Alzheimer's disease, it's all the time. Missing a monthly payment versus can't deal with the bills. One of the simplest ways I like to think about it is if you're driving, you probably or have a key to the apartment, you lose your keys, you lose track of where they are. Usually you find them fairly quickly. With Alzheimer's disease, you not only lose track of the keys, even when you find them, you may not be able to figure out what it's for. you know, what does that key have to do with the car, and where do I put the key in the car? So it's a bit of a different process. In the beginning, it can be hard to tell, but we'll get into this a little bit more. And
Jay, we cannot hear the video.
you can't hear it?
No, I would suggest you stop sharing and then make sure you click share video sound.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
that's a very good idea. I probably didn't do that.
That's okay.
So now we need to
Stop share. Should be at the top. Could have
stop.
moved.
Pardon?
Go ahead.
I have it on the bottom.
That's
Resume
fine.
share.
Yep, click stop share.
It doesn't say stop. It says new share. That might be.
You don't want new share. You want to stop.
Stop. There it is. I got
Yeah.
it.
There you go.
And we want to go to
Share screen and then
yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Right. Share sound. Very
right.
good. Okay. And we will, let's see. So now we're okay.
Every time we learn something new, we are
that good
creating
now, Adam?
and strengthening new neural connections.
All good.
Synapses.
Good.
In the nun study, 678 nuns, all over the age of 75 when the study began, were followed for more than 2 decades. They were regularly given physical checkups and cognitive tests, and when they died, their brains were all donated for autopsy. In some of these brains, scientists discovered something surprising. Despite the presence of plaques and tangles and brain shrinkage, what appeared to be unquestionable Alzheimer's, the nuns who had belonged to these brains showed no signs of having the disease while they were alive. How can this be? We think it's because these nuns had a high level of cognitive reserve, which is a way of saying that they had more functional synapses. People who have more years of formal education, who have a high degree of literacy, who engage regularly in mentally stimulating activities, all have more cognitive reserve. They have an abundance and a redundancy in neural connections. So even if they have a disease like Alzheimer's compromising some of their synapses, they've got many extra backup connections, and this buffers them from noticing that anything is amiss. Let's imagine a simplified example. Let's say you only know one thing about a subject. Let's say it's about me. You know that Lisa Genova wrote Still Alice, and that's the only thing you know about me. You have that single neural connection, that one synapse. Now imagine you have Alzheimer's. You have plaques and tangles and inflammation and microglia devouring that synapse. Now when someone asks you, hey, who wrote Still Alice? You can't remember because that synapse is either failing or gone. You've forgotten me forever. But what if you had learned more about me? Let's say you learned 4 things about me. Now imagine you have Alzheimer's and 3 of those synapses are damaged or destroyed. You still have a way to detour the wreckage. You can still remember my name. So we can be resilient to the presence of Alzheimer's pathology through the recruitment of yet undamaged pathways. And we create these pathways, this cognitive reserve, by learning new things. Now, ideally, we want these new things to be as rich in meaning as possible, recruiting sight and sound and associations and emotion. So this really doesn't mean doing crossword puzzles. You don't want to simply retrieve information you've already learned, because this is like traveling down old familiar streets, cruising neighborhoods you already know. You want to pave new neural roads. Building an Alzheimer's resistant brain means learning to speak.
So one of the things that I take seriously is what Lisa Genova is talking about, pushing the brain to learn new things. That's really, if you take a look at what Adam was saying about what I've been teaching at OLLI, it's not what I did in my practice. I didn't know a whole lot about stem cells or the new immunological approaches to cancer treatment. And even what we're talking about today, albeit the brain and psychiatrists deal with the brain, we're looking a little bit more at the neurological side of the brain and somewhat also at the psychiatric side, which we'll get to. But that pushed me to learn new things and hopefully gave me more possibilities to remember things, learn things, and exercise the plasticity, which we'll get into more. The brain continues to grow its connections, but we'll talk more about that. So the brain is constantly changing. What you use, what unused connections get pruned, used connections get strengthened. This process continues throughout our lives.
And I'm excited to share with you about the superagers that we study. But before I can kind of talk about what superagers are, I thought I'd just give a brief amount of background. We all know this, but here's the depressing slide of the day where you look at age across the x-axis and then memory performance on the y-axis where higher numbers are better, and you see this over the decades that there's this decline. And so if we were to just look at these average data in isolation, we might come up with this conclusion that cognitive decline is an inevitable consequence of aging, and that we could merely determine someone's cognitive age by the passage of time. And by the many talks we heard today, we know that that's not adequate. And so one way to show that that's not adequate is just by putting the actual individual data up there, and then the story becomes much different. We see now the green area is the average range, and we see that that average range is very narrow back in our 30s and 40s, and it expands over time. But the thing that got us really intrigued were these people that I put in triangles here. So these individuals seem to be resistant in some way, and they're performing as well as individuals decades younger than themselves. And this was kind of the theoretical spark for the idea of studying what I'm going to describe as superagers. Okay, so now I can change that comment and say cognitive decline may be a common, but maybe it's not an inevitable consequence of aging. And so cognitive age is more likely a composite of genetic factors, experience, and the passage of time. So if we have these simplified trajectories where we have a pathologic trajectory, a normal aging trajectory where there's some loss of memory, and then perhaps theoretically there's this super aging trajectory. So that's kind of the framework we are under, but now we've got to operationalize it. And we did it in the following way. So we glued the word super and aging together, we put a capital A, and we wanted to.
So Eric Kandel is a Nobel Prize winner. He, at the time of this talk, which you're going to see in a moment, he was 92 years old.
When I came into the field in 1957, one didn't know how memory worked on a biological level. The rules of memory, repetition, practice makes perfect, but we didn't know what happens in the brain. There were ideas. One idea that Cajal had, one of the founders of neuroscience, is that nerve cells talk to one another, and that contact point where they talk to one another is called the synapse. And he suggested that maybe synapses change in strength with learning. But there were many other ideas around. So I developed a very simple system in which you could explore this in some great detail. Only a few nerve cells control the behavior, and I showed that Cajal was right, that memory leads to a strengthening of connections between nerve cells in the brain. Moreover, I was able to go on and define the molecular details underlying that. I showed short-term memory involves a change in the pre-existing proteins, but long-term memory involves the synthesis of new proteins. It leads to an alteration in gene expression, which leads to new proteins that then give rise to the growth of new synaptic connections. This gave us the first biological insight into how memory is stored, and memory is an important process of the brain. So when you lose memories, it's a biological process. And everyone to some degree has a weakening of memory with age. That falls into two categories. Age-related memory loss, which is a milder form, actually begins somewhat earlier, involves a different region of the brain, and I think may be readily reversible with intellectual games and things like this, exercise, good food, good diet, and Alzheimer's disease, which is a much more serious disease, which one needs treatment for. In Alzheimer's, you have a bad protein that kills synapses. I'm also interested in what perpetuates memory. How do you remember your first love experience for the rest of your life? And I found a very interesting mechanism, a self-perpetuating protein at the synapse that can just keep going. And in memories that are sustained for a long time, that is what becomes active and carries it. I'm also interested in disorders of memory, post-traumatic stress disorder, in which a certain memory is activated for a very long period of time. It turns out this also involves a self-perpetuating protein of sorts. So I'm interested in how memory is altered in the various conditions.
So one of the things that Dr. Kandel researched is that, and others have as well, that physical exercise, so we've mentioned a little about mental exercise. Now let's switch to physical exercise. And it turns out that's also extremely good for the brain. And it can lower the person's risk for Alzheimer's disease and even slow brain aging by about 10 years. It's also good for normal aging. It may be even better for that. And what we're talking about is about 45 minutes, 3 times a week of either aerobic or resistance training. Both are good. Combination is even better. And walking is fine, especially if you try to find a few steps to walk up if in addition. So that's what we're talking about 45 minutes, maybe an hour of moderate to vigorous exercise 3 times a week. And in fact, to see just how good exercise is, this is an interesting study and a very unusual study. It's covered over here, but this is a study done in Scandinavia over a 44-year period of time from 1968 to 2012 with starting off with women in middle age around 40, 45. And there were 191 of them. And all they did was measure their fitness at that initial point in time. And assuming that if they were fit at that point, they would continue their fitness. If they weren't very fit, they would continue the pattern, which is a reasonably large assumption. And then followed them through their databases about whether or not they had developed dementia. Now, those with the lowest fitness, there were 59 women, and 19 of them developed all dementia of all causes, 9 of which was Alzheimer's. That was 32%. Comparing them to the women who started off in midlife, at least with high fitness, there were 40 of those, only 2 developed any dementia of any kind, and that's 5%, and none developed Alzheimer's disease. That's a pretty amazing statistic. It turns out that the same pattern is seen depending, that doesn't depend on weight particularly. It's fitness that we're talking about, not body weight. Now, there's a lot of things going on in this slide. I'll just point out too that we're talking about brain plasticity. And that means that there are stem cells, which when I was in medical school many years ago, we didn't know about brain plasticity and we didn't know anything about stem cells, and especially not stem cells in the brain. Rather, we were taught that you're born with a certain number of neurons and synapses and you just lose them as you go on over a lifetime. It turns out that's not entirely true. You're losing synapses and neurons, but you also have some stem cells in certain important parts of the brain, especially the hippocampus, the central memory area. And they can, with proper stimulation of mental exercise, physical exercise, and some other things that we'll get into later, that sets off a bunch of hormones, brain-derived neuropathic factor, BDNF. It turns a stem cell into an active adult functioning cell in the hippocampus and other areas. It increases the survival of these neurons. And same thing goes on and when you're running, skeletal muscle turns on. That raises something called irisin, which is a hormone that goes through the blood to the brain, also raising BDNF. There's also, not only does your muscle send off hormones, but your bone does too. There's something called calcitonin, which is another hormone which stimulates, again, brain-derived neuropathic factor and new neurons and accounts for the growth and exercise and continued good function in people who exercise their brain physically and mentally. This is one of the most important things that we're going to talk about this afternoon, the importance of sleep, and I'll just put this on.
The surface of the brain within the tissue itself. We've labeled the blood vessels in red, and the CSF that's surrounding the brain will be in green. Now, what was surprising to us was that the fluid on the outside of the brain, it didn't stay on the outside. Instead, the CSF was pumped back into and through the brain along the outsides of the blood vessels. And as it flushed down into the brain along the outsides of these vessels, it was actually helping to clear away, to clean the waste from the spaces between the brain cells. If you think about it, using the outsides of these blood vessels like this is a really clever design solution. Because the brain is enclosed in a rigid skull, and it's packed full of cells. So there is no extra space inside it for a whole second set of vessels like the lymphatic system. Yet the blood vessels, they extend from the surface of the brain down to reach every single cell in the brain, which means that fluid that's traveling along the outsides of these vessels can gain easy access to the entire brain's volume. So it's actually this really clever way to repurpose one set of vessels, the blood vessels, to take over and replace the function of a second set of vessels, the lymphatic vessels, to make it so you don't need them. And what's amazing is that no other organ takes quite this approach to clearing away the waste from between its cells. This is a solution that is entirely unique to the brain. But our most surprising finding was that all of this, everything I just told you about, with all this fluid rushing through the brain, it's only happening in the sleeping brain. Here, the video on the left shows how much of the CSF is moving through the brain of a living mouse while it's awake. It's almost nothing. Yet in the same animal, if we wait just a little while until it's gone to sleep, what we see is that the CSF is rushing through the brain. And we discovered that at the same time, when the brain goes to sleep, the brain cells themselves seem to shrink, opening up spaces in between them, allowing fluid to rush through and allowing waste to be cleared out.
You can see that this study has been done in the last 3 or 4 years and been repeated incidentally in humans. You talked about the mouse, but it's true for humans as well. And we begin to have moved a rather long way from Freudian psychology of the importance of sleep for dreaming, which is important, and dreaming is important for memory, and we can even talk about that later if you want. But there's a physiological, very basic reason that all animals need to sleep, and especially for us, it's very important for our brain function, for our memory. We have to clear out the garbage, the metabolic products that the brain is putting out. It takes its energy with glucose, and it metabolizes that. That sends the brain as an electrochemical organ, so it's active all the time. It's firing. Neurons, all of that takes energy, and there are waste products to energy. And those need to be cleared. And until fairly recently, we didn't know how that happened. because the rest of the body uses something called the lymphatic system. The lymph nodes in your neck or those sort of things are part of a separate system. Aside from the blood, the arteries and the veins, there's lymphatics. Turns out the brain doesn't have lymphatics. And now it turns out that what happens is the brain during sleep, the neurons contract and the vascular contracts so that there's spaces along the outside of the blood vessels in which the cerebrospinal fluid, the brain is bathed in this cushioning fluid, and that rushes in and clears it out, and that eventually gets back into the blood system and back in for clearance from the kidney. So that's the process, and that looks like the most important part of, but that means you have to be asleep. And we can talk about that as a problem as well as we get older and how to make that better, et cetera, et cetera. Big topic in and of itself. Now, another thing that's important in preserving your brain, especially as you get older, is in fact, not only for preserving your brain, but for living a bit longer. We now know that one of the things that throughout the animal kingdom, starting with yeast, fungus, so it's not even necessarily in animals, that a little bit of periodic fasting, any kind of calorie deprivation, providing it isn't too much, because that obviously can be its own problem, does seem to increase lifespan and also increases brain function. It's part of something we call hormesis, Hormesis, that if you stress a biological system like the brain or any other part of the system, like the muscular system, if you stress it with exercising, it responds by getting the muscles get bigger and stronger. Well, it turns out that any kind of stress, and exercise is a kind of stress, but so is some fasting, periodic fasting or something like that, will cause hormesis, and the body responds by getting more vigorous, and that seems to decrease the diseases associated with old age, including Alzheimer's, but also diabetes, cancer, heart disease. And we're going to, now the problem is you don't want to get carried away with fasting, and it's hard to do. And so here's a little discussion with Dr. Longo, who's done a lot of work in this field about there's modification. He's written a book called The Fasting Mimicking Diet, which is a good book. I recommend it. We'll hear more from Dr. Longo.
It was done by Richard Weindruck at the University of Wisconsin, and showing how calorie restriction, this chronic calorie restriction, can completely eliminate diabetes and reduce cancer and cardiovascular disease in monkeys by 50%. So these are remarkable achievements if you think about it. But the problem with calorie restriction is that the lifespan of these monkeys is not extended, because by being pushed to the limit chronically like that so long, then you have other problems. For example, immunity might be affected negatively, right? So I think the fasting mimicking diet, in the longevity diet, the rest of the everyday diet that I described, is really putting 25 years of our work together to say, we think now we found a way to get all the benefits of calorie restriction and removing, again, or the great majority of detrimental problems. For example, a loss of muscle mass and being emaciated, as you will, as if you were calorie restricted. These are obvious problems that people don't wanna do or don't wanna face. And I think the periodic fasting mimicking diet eliminates this.
So again, for our viewers, it's really getting the best of both worlds, where you get the benefits of caloric restriction or fasting, and yet the downsides that you just mentioned, like emaciation, loss of muscle mass, dysregulation of the immune system, are not as likely to happen because you've created this way of a diet that's good for you, but then mimics the notion of fasting. So
us, but it was done by.
Now we're going to get into another topic
Here
of
we have
socialization.
the most miraculous mass of protoplasm on this earth, and perhaps in our galaxy. Its potential is virtually unknown. Do you ever think about the brain in your head and what its potential is? Cells thinking about themselves. And it can, under proper conditions, stay healthy and active for a full 100 years. We've seen people who are living this long now. They don't have to be the exception. All of us can do it if we learn how to enrich our brains. I think people keep asking, well, what is old age?
Right.
And I say it depends on what part of the body.
Right.
Because development and aging are a continuum through a lifetime.
Right.
Now 73, Dr. Marion Diamond has been challenging herself all her life. She is internationally recognized for her groundbreaking research on the brain. She has also been honored as one of the nation's most distinguished teachers. Two of her accomplishments as a researcher have earned her particular recognition: her work on the structure and differences between male and female brains, and her discovery that with proper stimulation, brains continue to develop at any age.
We wanted to know, well, what's going on in the brain? 12 rats in a large cage with lots of objects to play with. And in contrast, there was one rat in a single cage. And they stayed in their environmental conditions for 80 days. And at the end of 80 days, we looked at the brains. And the chemists looked at the chemistry, and I looked at the anatomy, and found that the cerebral cortex, the outer layers of the brain, had changed by 6%. There was a difference between the enriched and impoverished. This German professor stood up at the back of the room and he said, "Young lady, those brains are not old. Our German rats lived to be 800 days. So we came back to Berkeley to figure out how we're going to get our rats to live long, because we were actually losing them at 600 days, and that's why we decided to use them at that age. And so we decided to give our rats TLC. Well, we took them and held them against our lab coats and talked to them for a few minutes each day. And we found the 904, which as far as we could calculate is equivalent to a 90-year-old person, we were still seeing the changes. So that let us know that we could change the young brain, as everybody anticipated, the middle-aged brain. And I've never seen the Germans come out with older rats than 900. In fact, my colleagues all say, "How did you do it?" But I don't think they're willing to give the TLC that's necessary for these long experiments. And that.
Do you feel subtle feelings of loneliness? Well, in older folks, this might be a warning sign of Alzheimer's disease, a new study suggests. Healthy seniors with elevated brain levels of amyloid, a type of protein fragment associated with Alzheimer's disease, seem more likely to feel lonely than people with lower levels of amyloid, researchers found. The director of the Center for Alzheimer's Research and Treatment at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, Dr. Nancy Donovan, said, "For people who have high levels of amyloid, the people truly at high risk for Alzheimer's, they were 7.5 times more likely to be lonely than non-lonely." But the results of the new study suggest that relationship may work the other way around as well, that people in the early stages of Alzheimer's might be more apt to feel lonely or socially detached.
So loneliness as opposed to socialization, and I think that's particularly relevant given the organizations represented here. Friends Life Care and OLLI both obviously not only believe in learning, but socialization and the power of that. and the danger of people being alone, especially as they get older and possibly with some kind of diseases, physical or mental. Or four things that are associated with declines in faster in brain volume. Untreated high blood pressure. Treatment works. Untreated or not well treated diabetes, either late onset or early diabetes. Cigarette smoking is a positive toxic, as we've been told many, many times. Being overweight or obese is another problem. So trying to get rid of those, and that's why you need to go, and hopefully you all have a primary care physician who helps you with the medicines and also any of these are all preventative of all of the diseases of late onset, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, et cetera, Alzheimer's. Sleep apnea is another issue. And remember the importance of sleep when we saw that cerebrospinal fluid pulsating. But there's another thing, sleep apnea. And you don't know if you have that only if you have someone who you share a bed with or who comes in while you're sleeping. It's a short pause in breathing while sleeping. The person just sort of stops breathing and it's quiet for maybe 10 or 15 seconds and then breathes quickly afterwards. And sometimes it disrupts their sleep. It always disrupts good sleep and is associated with high blood pressure, stroke, memory loss, et cetera, and their treatment. And again, that's something to talk with your primary care physician about. Avoiding alcohol, losing weight, quitting smoking, and then there's CPAP devices, special positive pressure devices, and some minor surgical procedures. So that's an important thing not to have and to avoid. And here's something right up my alley as a psychiatrist, depression and the aging brain. Depression is not only the most common mental health disorder after age 50, it's also the leading cause of disability throughout the world is major depression. And untreated depression is an independent risk factor for cognitive decline. So you find people who've had repeated depressions, again, especially if untreated and allowing the depression to fester, will begin to show signs of memory loss, and in fact seem to go on in more cases than we like to go on to dementia. Now, the good part is that either psychotherapy, especially in combination with medicine, will reverse the depression, and it looks like it reverses the associated memory loss and possibility for going on to further cognitive decline. The good part here is that emotional aging, and this we all know as we get older, we're really basically the same. The problem is that it gets harder to maintain your good spirits, it's to some degree, especially when we're physically compromised, have hearing loss, vision loss, mobility losses. But we need to understand and accept those, that it's normal, and be happy for the fact that we're still around. And so actually, more people than not do quite well with their emotional aging. And we'll see, I have a slide on that a little bit later. But it's very important. And as we pointed out, since that the importance of depression, but the opposite is feeling vigorous and looking forward to things. And one of the things is, you looked at the slides and some of the scientists, I particularly like to choose older ones. They're pretty engaged and excited about their work even as they get older. Uh, APOE, for some of you who do 23andMe or other genetic analysis, it turns out that there's a genetic component that's relatively easy to identify. It's called APOE. The question is, and it is a marker for both Alzheimer's disease and ischemic heart disease. It doesn't necessarily mean, it just means that your likelihood of having one or both of those is higher, and that you would need more to do all of those things about mental exercise, physical exercise, maybe some caloric restriction, sleep, attention, et cetera, but and now there's possibly a new treatment for Alzheimer's, although that's highly debatable. How effective it is. It is an amyloid blocker. But any event, I just wanted to mention that factor. It's APOE4 is about 20 to 25% of humans. Same thing of what I said. On the other hand, possibly the reason that people still have it through the generations and the survival of species is that they APOE4 carriers show increased resistance to infections. So that's the other side of the coin. So again, increased, better diet, and we might get into that if there are questions about that, and exercise may counter the APOE4 possibility of carriers. There's lots of things that maybe we could talk about, things that are going to come along. We're going to, if we live long enough. So going to get into just a couple of these. This one's about games, mental games, stimulation.
Well, what we found was that a group of older adults who played a video game that we custom designed to train a deficit that we know that population has in their ability to deal with interference, which is distraction and multitasking, and in general cognitive control abilities. We found that by playing the game repetitively over a period of time, that we were able to improve how they played the game in terms of multitasking on the game, but also other abilities that we didn't train directly, like their sustained attention and their working memory.
So we made a game that involved playing it for a set amount of time that had adaptivity, so it got harder as you got better. And we thought that if we challenged people's abilities in an interference-laden place where it was really complicated and busy, it would help drive their brain to adapt in a way that would have helped them in other areas.
It shows what a lot of us have been learning, and we believe, is that the older brain is still plastic. That plasticity, this ability of our brain to reshape itself in response to a stimulus from the environment, doesn't end at a critical period of development, but continues throughout our life. So if we just know how to target it and channel it directly, then we can get very large effects. But the type of training that people might think is helpful, like playing a crossword puzzle and other types of games that don't really push these abilities at a very fundamental level, might not have as much of an effect. So it really depends what you're doing. Not everything that you do will be equally good for your brain or for the rest of your body, for that matter.
So my research is based on the idea that we can find ways to slow down diseases of aging, and maybe even aging itself. And when I started doing this about 15 years ago, this was considered a crazy idea to find genes that actually control the aging process. But actually now we know there are genes in our bodies. There are 7 of them that we work on called sirtuins. And these genes, we think, control the body's natural defenses against diseases and aging itself. And so the overall theme of my lab's research over at Harvard Medical School is to find ways to tap into our body's natural defenses and turn on these genes that exist in our cells, but they typically don't do a very good job. And so we're trying to make medicines that will turn on these pathways, these very ancient pathways, and boost them in a way that will slow down diseases. And when I say diseases, that includes essentially all of the major diseases of Western society, of the developed world. So there's cancer and heart disease, Alzheimer's, osteoporosis, heart disease. And what we're finding in the lab, by tweaking these sirtuin genes and even some of the drugs that we have in clinical trials, they're able to slow down not just one of these diseases, but actually slow down all of them and even reverse some of them. And so the future that I hope to see, if this research comes to bear, I really think that it'll happen in our lifetimes, is that a patient could go to their doctor and let's say they have high blood sugar, they have type 2 diabetes, and the doctor will say, well, we have this medicine. It's a breakthrough medicine, brand new on the market, and it'll bring down your blood sugar. And that, the patient says, that's great news. And the doctor says, well, I have to warn you, there are some side effects to this drug. Some of the side effects include you'll be protected against cancer and heart disease and Alzheimer's and osteoporosis, and by the way, your memory will improve. Now that sounds like science fiction, but actually we do this all the time in the lab with animals. We can make mice smarter, run twice as far, protected from all those diseases, and we haven't found any side effects yet that are negative. So we could have medicines that simultaneously protect the elderly or even the middle-aged person from some of the diseases that kill people. And the future, I think, is really bright. You can imagine a future where a 90-year-old is just as healthy as a 50-year-old and still plays tennis, and maybe we see people reaching their hundreds when they can see their great-grandkids graduate from uni. So this is the future that I hope to see. When I started this work, it was considered crazy to consider that you might find one gene or one drug that could really have a big impact on aging. And that was because we used to think of our bodies like cars that would wear out, break down, and we used to think of our bodies just like machines. And actually medicine is practiced that way still, but we actually have gone through a paradigm shift in thinking about aging and our bodies. And what we now realize is that our bodies are far more complicated and intelligent compared to a car. So for example, when a car gets damaged or rusts or something breaks, the car doesn't fix itself. And in fact, if you fix the exhaust pipe, it doesn't mean that the scratch or the dent in the body will be fixed. But our bodies are different. When we're damaged, when we're under stress, when we don't get enough food, we seek out food. Our bodies repair the damage. And what we found out is these processes are not separate. There are these master regulators of defenses against disease. And some of these are the sirtuin genes that I work on. And so when we tweak the SIRT1 gene, which is one of these sirtuins, it doesn't just keep the paint shiny and new or repair the exhaust pipe. It fixes everything and makes the whole body more robust and fitter. And that's why we think we're seeing these simultaneous protection against heart disease and cancer and Alzheimer's. And it's not miraculous, it's just a new way of thinking about aging and realizing that we have inbuilt defenses against disease and we just need to turn them on. When I left Australia, I went to work as a postdoctoral researcher at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, with an amazing man. He's still a good friend, Leonard Guarenti. And we and others in the lab were trying to understand why do yeast cells, baker's yeast, brewer's yeast, grow old. And if we could understand why they grow old and die, maybe we could find genes that control that process. And again, this was a crazy idea. How could yeast tell us anything about human aging? You know, we get heart disease and cancer, and yeast cells, they're just a single microscopic cell. But nevertheless, I thought that at least we should start with something simple, because if we can't figure it out for yeast, we have no hope of figuring it out for humans. And so what we did was we did find a cause of aging in yeast. Turns out their chromosomes get tangled and tend to choke the cell. And then there was a gene that was discovered that it slowed down this process called SIR2, and that's what gave the name to this whole class of genes called sirtuins. And we actually have 7 of those in our body, and they seem to protect different organs from diseases. Starting in 2003, I've been working to find and progress to the clinic molecules that can actually turn on these sirtuin defenses in our body. And we've gone initially from extending lifespan in yeast cells through to little nematode worms and fruit flies. We've done this in obese mice, We have some early interesting results even on lean mice that they might be living longer, but they're certainly healthier. And actually now these molecules have been worked on by hundreds of people. They've been improved in their potency and safety many-fold, and they're in human studies right now in Europe and in the UK for different diseases of aging, like, for example, type 2 diabetes or inflammation like arthritis and inflammation of the bowel. So these are areas that are either in progress or in future will be tested in the clinic. Now, often people ask me, what's the latest? Are they working? Well, it's too early to divulge, but I can say that the molecules have proven surprisingly safe so far in over 100 people. And it's still early days in terms of drug development, but over the next few years we'll certainly know if it's going to be sooner or later that we can achieve this goal of having medicines that work on multiple diseases. And it's a big effort. It's gone way beyond my single laboratory now. There's tens of millions of dollars being spent each year on these trials. And so we'll have to see. Drug development is risky, of course. There's no guarantee, especially something as challenging as combating diseases of aging. But I'm optimistic. The science is solid. The field of aging is now at the forefront of biology. And if I'm not successful and these drugs don't end up on the market, I think someone will have a breakthrough. We've had the paradigm shift. We know it's possible. It's just a matter of time that we'll have these remarkable drugs to treat the elderly and the sick. Often this sounds too good to be true, that this might be the fountain of youth. And I don't like that to say that, because people have tried for thousands of years to do this. And again, I have to be frank, I don't know if this is going to be successful, but I do know that it will be possible one day. It may be in the next few years, maybe it's another few decades, I don't know, but we've certainly turned a corner, and I think that the future of humanity looks bright. If we can have medicines like this, I think dying in your 60s or being frail in your 80s may be a thing of the past. And I hope to see that in my lifetime, if not, just help our kids. But I think that medicine has a bright future, and I'm really excited to be part of it.
This is a very interesting slide, especially for me. It turns out it's a measure of happiness, well-being, and going from age. So at 18, people are fairly happy, 18 to 21, and then with the problems of jobs, marriage, kids, taking care of them, things begin to deteriorate, especially in the 50s. Maybe some illnesses occur. And then for those who survive, which is most people, they start to get happier. And here we are in the 82 to 85 group. There's both males and females. It's bounced up. It's even higher than the teenagers. Optimistic. For those of you who wanted to pursue some of this further, the second part of this book that I wrote, co-authored a couple years ago, Happy End of Life, it's available through Amazon, paperback or a Kindle. And it has all the slides and references. I built the slides from that book chapter, which is actually the second half of that book. So we'll stop and we'll take some questions.
Thank you so much. I love ending on that hopeful note too, with the medication and really beautiful about happiness increasing. So I'm going to encourage everyone to use the chat box or the Q&A box to answer any questions. I do see someone had raised their hand earlier, but we aren't able to call on you that way. So please ask any questions in the box there. And again, this was just a little taste of what you'll get from classes with OLLI, which Adam will talk a little bit about. So maybe while we're waiting for some questions, Adam, just start off with a little bit and then we'll check in on questions.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So let's see, I have a little PowerPoint here that I could share. And Katie, feel free to interrupt me at any point if you have questions for Jay.
Of course, yeah, I have one coming in, so I'll wait for a few more and then I'll politely interrupt you.
Okay, yeah, please do. So So the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Temple University has been around for quite a while. It actually started in 1975 under the name of Temple Association for Retired Persons. And back in 2008, we received several grants from the Bernard Osher Foundation. And contingent on us receiving those grants, they asked us to change our name. And we became part of a network of 120 Osher Lifelong Learning Institutes around the country. Right now, we have 2 campuses at which we offer in-person classes. One at Center City at 1515 Market, which is right immediately above Suburban Train Station. Another at Temple's Ambler campus on Meeting House Road in Ambler. And we offer many online classes as well.
I'm going to pop in right here.
Go
Adam.
right ahead. Go right ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a question here in the chat wondering about naps and any benefits to naps.
Naps are fine. A longer nap is better than a shorter nap. It turns out that brain washing with the cerebrospinal fluid requires the deeper stages of sleep. There are 4 stages of sleep. It's in stages 3 and 4 where you find the decrease in the size of the blood vessels, the temporary shrinking of neurons to allow the room for the cerebrospinal fluid to come in and take out the used molecules, mostly proteins. We know, for example, even in Alzheimer's disease, there's at least 2 defective proteins. Amyloid beta is one and tau is another. And one theory of Alzheimer's is that it is a lack of sleep is contributing to it because it doesn't allow for the cerebrospinal fluid to come in and wash out those proteins that are, because they're byproducts of metabolism, they happen to be toxic. And we know that. And in fact, the medicine tries to decrease successfully, at least the beta amyloid, less successful with the tau. But so naps are good. A longer nap is better than a shorter nap. Deeper sleep is better than, and that also tells us that sleep aids, like sleeping medicines, they're better than nothing if you really can't sleep. But unfortunately, you're only putting to sleep part of your brain, the conscious part. So you're not getting the same amount of brain cleansing that you would get in fully deep sleep that's non-pharmacological. Some of the cognitive behavioral attempts to improve sleep and sleep hygiene, for example, not looking at TV and your smartphone and your computer for hours at a time before you go to sleep and stimulate yourself, so then you can't sleep. You want a dark room. If you come to OLLI, you'll find out a lot more about sleep and other topics.
I'm seeing some names here that I know, so hello to everyone that's attending. This question says, my mother died of dementia at 85 and father died of it at 93. Am I doomed to get dementia?
No one's doomed to anything except death, I think. I think we're all doomed to that. Those are pretty good ages to begin with. So even there is certainly a genetic component to longevity, but you can get hit by a truck. So accidents are an important part of everything as well. So there's nothing sure, but that's pretty good. But that's a clue. We know that centenarians, people who live to be 100, for example, their children are 50% more likely to live to be centenarians than the rest of us. So there's certain genetic factors. They probably have to do with handling lipids better, for heart disease, which is the #1 killer. Cancers, there are certain genetic diseases that cause cancer. Lynch syndrome is one of them, cancer of the colon. So breast cancer, there's various genes that are associated, not with the majority, but with a minority of breast cancers. And same with cervical cancer. So genes are important, but they're not the whole story. I didn't spend a lot of time on genes except the apolipoprotein E4, just as an example of one that's linked to Alzheimer's and coronary artery disease, because you can't really do a whole lot at this point in time. However, there's already there's actually some rare diseases that are being treated with gene therapy. They're a small number, but that's going to happen later on, more so. So we are more than our inheritance, but inheritance is important.
Sure. We have two questions here about fasting. The first is, can you elaborate on the modified fasting? How does it work?
So that is that's a whole book. I spent several sessions on that. It gets a little complicated. It's very specialized. It involves a diet high in amino acids and protein and for specific purposes. And also the most interesting part is not only is there some proven links to longevity, but we're not talking lots of years. We're talking a couple more years. But as we get older, a couple more years is pretty important, especially if it's accompanied by good health. So health span is probably more important than lifespan, but that's also involved with that fasting mimicking diet. But in particular, it is particularly good against when you're getting chemotherapy, for example, that there's a way of potentially starving your high metabolizing cancer cells differentially, more so than your normal cells, to decrease both the side effects and increase the potency of any chemotherapy. So, the problem with a lot of this stuff is it doesn't reach the practicing physician for another 10 to 15, 20 years. So it is important for people who are interested. I'd look up Dr. Longo's book, Fasting Mimicking Diet. It's a big book and a worthwhile book. David Sinclair is also has written a book on lifespan and health span that's very good. Also, there's a lot of references in my book, actually. If you just put my name in and you find my book, I've referenced a number, I think all of these books, except the ones that have come out in the last year or so. And there's a lot, YouTube, I get these videos that you saw, I took off YouTube and put them into PowerPoint. But you can, watch YouTube. I spend a lot more time than I should watching YouTube. In fact, just before we started this session, I had some extra time, and sure enough, I was watching Dr. Sinclair, and the material I showed is really 2 years old. And I was watching some from a couple months ago in which he's moved on to epigenetics and information as a cause of aging within our cells. It isn't the chromosomes, but how which chromosomes are turned on when, and that's called epigenetics, or gene expression, and that turns out to be really important. And there are also additives. He mentioned new medicines, none that I would recommend, but Dr. Sinclair recommends them, and he's a bigger authority than I am, but they include something like nicotinamide riboside and NMN. That's not MMN, it's NMN. And the specialized medicines that you can get in the health food store, but they haven't been approved yet by the FDA, and that may not be for a while. So there's lots. This is sort of like a smorgasbord at a very for tidbits.
Right.
And we only took one tidbit of the brain in particular, What I spent the last year and a half on was at OLLI was going over in some detail different parts of the body and including things like the spine. Pretty important, especially if you have back pain.
We have a
stop there.
comment here letting everyone know they've been taking OLLI classes for a while and they think they're terrific. So thank you for sharing that. The next question, if you experience maybe 8 weeks of high stress, can you reverse the negative physical and mental effects when the stress is decreased?
Yes. So you have to go back. Now that happens to all of us. You get an illness or you job situation or someone, God forbid, dies or divorce or losses. So we all go through stresses. The important thing is, to get back on the horse and do all the good things, socialization, stimulate the brain, do exercise, eat right. Also, let me just do a couple more things about eating. Sugar is bad. I didn't know that until I retired. I started to work on this and it looks pretty bad. Also, processed food isn't very good either. And there's some reasons for that, including your microbiome and those are the bacteria and viruses in your gut. It turns out they're very important. Then they get changed by processed food. Fiber is very important, and processed food destroys fiber. So there's a lot to know. Not that any of us need to know it unless it's a career for you. You don't have to know it all, but you may want to, it's interesting. And if you want to expand your brain, if you have any interest in science or health, I would venture that watching some YouTube videos is not a bad way to start.
We have a question about using melatonin or Prevagen, if I'm saying that correctly.
Yes, two different things. Melatonin is good. It looks like it does seem to, it's a natural hormone produced by the pineal gland. And it's available commercially in the food stores. I think people take around 3 milligrams, but it's variable. That's one of the problems. The potency is variable between brands, but you'd have to be trial and error to see what works. But it's pretty safe stuff, and it is pretty good at inducing sleep. It isn't very good at maintaining sleep, but it's also good if you've been traveling, go through different time zones. It could be helpful. Prevagen is advertised all the time on the TV, and every time it comes on, I think my blood pressure goes up by 10 or 15 points because there are various studies, none of which showing that it works. The AARP was so concerned that it put out a whole bunch of information against Prevagen that was pretty well scientifically based. So I certainly wouldn't recommend that. I don't think it'll harm you. And the reason people rightfully can say that it works is there's a placebo effect to anything. It may be, especially if you believe it, you're 20% more likely to feel better and feel sharper. So I wish I believed in Prevagen, but it wouldn't work for me because I don't believe in it and I don't think there's evidence for it.
We have a number of questions. I'm just going to finish up with what we have and then pass it back
Sure.
to you, Adam. So somebody is saying that they dream a lot and they're wondering if dreaming is a part of sleep or if it's bad for you.
Dreaming is good for you. Everyone dreams. Question is whether or not you remember it. That happens in the rapid eye movement phase of sleep, light sleep. It looks like it's very important for memory consolidation and for inventiveness. The brain goes around and it tries out all kinds of different illogical things, and you wake up suddenly having a connection, maybe through a dream that you remember or maybe not. It's a wonder. And when I was in college, I remember staying up an occasional night to study for an exam. It was really bad. I should have gone to sleep and especially dreamed. I would have done much better. So dreaming is natural, good for you. And I think it's also involved with emotional processing. To that degree, Freud was correct.
We have somebody telling us that they get about 5 or 6 hours of sleep, solid sleep, but then wake up. Is that enough sleep?
That's barely enough. We think it's 6 to 8 to 10. Ideally, 8 to 10, 8 or 9 would be ideal. 6 is probably all right. 5 begins to be a little bit on the short side. And it also depends on the quality of sleep. Unfortunately, as you get older, lots of people have to go to the bathroom, especially men with prostate issues. So, but you can't not. So do what you can.
And we have questions about fasting. I know you recommended 2 really great books. We'll have to host you again to just talk to us about fasting. We have Judy asking us to describe more about the OLLI courses. So I'm going to pass that back over to Adam so he can do that. And as a reminder to answer some other questions, we are recording this so you can watch it again. And back to you, Adam. Thanks. Oh, I think you're muted. There you go.
Yes, thank you. Thanks. Okay, so let's see. Let me just, I'm going to get to the courses. Let me share with you how OLLI works. If one wants to join OLLI and take its classes, the first step is to become a member. We're a membership organization. You pay a flat membership fee depending on the time of year you join. Our academic year is fall, spring, and summer. We offer 3 semesters. If you join at the beginning of the year, it's $290 for the full year. If you join just for the fall, it's $125, or just for the spring, it's $125. Just for the summer, it's $75. But you have to become a member by paying one of these fees, and then you can start signing up for classes. And I just want to say a little bit about our instructors. 65% of our instructors were lifelong educators, but we also have several instructors who are lifelong professionals. Jay, you might even fit in with
I think I'm in the second category.
You're in the second, yeah, because you weren't like a teacher. That was your profession. There are lifelong professionals like Jay who are really bright, have a passion for a subject, and in their retirement are interested in learning, and trying out teaching. So it's really a wonderful way of building a new skill in retirement. We also have some people who are still in the work world who want to promote or share ideas about their field. For example, we have gentlemen from an organization called CARE, which is purpose is to educate people about the Muslim religion and culture, and they give courses to OLLI students as well. Our students, they have to be at least 50 years of age, and then after that, they could be 119 if they want. I just saw a thing about a lady who lived to be 119.
Right.
And the program is very much makes use of volunteers. All of our instructors are volunteers. We have elected volunteers who serve in roles as president, vice presidents, and we have several committees that help us operate the program. One of the most essential to the program is our curriculum committee, and their job is to identify gaps in our curriculum and identify potential people who can teach and vet potential instructors to make sure that they're knowledgeable about their subject and capable of teaching a very active, engaged group of students, which can be very, very different from teaching young people. And this is not a slur at all on young people, but certainly as people get older and have a lifetime of experience, they have a lot more to share in the classroom and a lot more things to relate to what they're being taught. So our students tend to be very engaged and very active. Here's just some examples of the kinds of courses that we offer. Just to give you a sense, in the fall semester, we offer roughly about 100 classes. In the spring, we offer about 100. In the summer, about 50. Now, those numbers are pre-COVID. That was back when we were offering mostly in-person classes. During COVID, it was cut in about half because we only offered online classes. I won't go into any of those other things. I'll just leave room for any questions that might exist. But I wanted, maybe it would be helpful too to, let me see if I can pull up the a recent catalog to just give you an idea of some of the kinds of classes that we have in a semester. Let me do this. Let's see.
And while you're looking at them,
Yeah.
somebody's asking if the online classes are over Zoom.
Yes, they are.
Great. I think we're all pretty familiar at this point how to use Zoom, so that's good news.
Great, great. So yeah, so let's see here. I'm going to share one of our recent catalogs here, just to give you a sense of the range of classes. And I hope this doesn't make you nauseous as I scroll down to get to the courses. But I'm just scrolling through here to give you a sense that we have classes on art, science, law, history, immigration, terrorism around the world, history, discussion classes, women's history, art, more art, politics, more law, religion, current events. Let me just see if I'll just give you a feel for these. Science. Oh my God, look at this one. Aging is a treatable disease.
That looks like a great class.
I highly recommend that. Yes. Economics, you name it. The body, anatomy, literature, more religion. So that just gives you a sense.
Languages. I take a Spanish conversation
Yes.
course.
Thank you, Jay. Language, lots of language courses, music. So, this gives you an idea of the range of classes. It's really, OLLI is really like a liberal arts college for people who are either approaching retirement or are retired, who want to keep their brains active, just like Jay was talking about, and also to meet like-minded people who love to learn and want to develop friendships and learn with them. So if you are interested in OLLI in the future, maybe I'll just put up that slide one more time about how to get in touch with us.
Yes, that would be wonderful.
Let me do that one more time. Whoop, I gotta go back here, share screen, and here's my name and number. And here is, let's do that from the beginning.
A little bigger, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll make that a little bigger. So where is it? Okay, there's my name and phone number and email. And here's our office number. Here's our website. Yeah, those are just ways to get in touch with us. Come the fall, we hope to be offering a lot more in-person classes. We also expect that many of those in-person classes will be hybrid. So the teachers will both be teaching to people in a classroom, and we're going to stream it online as well. And we're also going to have many classes that will just be exclusively online. We hope that you enjoyed this presentation by Jay, and that you might consider becoming part of the OLLI program. Just reach out to us if you do find it interesting.
Thank
And
you
Katie-
so much. I really appreciate the both of you being here. I mean, we obviously care a lot about keeping our members intellectually and socially healthy. And I think that what you do is so special and really in line with what we're looking for. So feel free to reach out to me if you need any additional information about what you saw today. We're getting some thank yous coming into the chat. We just appreciate your time so much today. So thank you. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you
All
for
right,
having
you will
us.
get a recording from us in 24 hours. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.